Welcome everyone to our live webinar, Implementing Employee-Generated Learning, the good, the bad, and the unexpected. First of all, also let me introduce myself. My name is Teresa. I'm a Customer Success Manager at Easy Generator, and I will be your host today. This also gives me the great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Derek Bruce from Derek Bruce Associates, who has been through the journey of implementing employee-generated learning himself. So welcome, Derek.
Thank you. Thank you.
And before we start, just one little housekeeping thing. I know everyone is already sharing their location in the chat. So this is also your way of asking questions during the webinar. So please make use of the chat. Make sure to ask all your questions during the webinar. We will be monitoring the chat, and then also in the end of the webinar, we will reserve a dedicated Q&A for the questions, and also between the session, we'll ask some questions. So now let me give the word to Derek for kicking off the webinar.
Yes, thank you, Therese. And I just see there's a note from Ed in the chat who's got a spinning arrow and a message saying it's connecting. So I don't know, Ed, if you want to maybe try and log off and log back on again, which normally from an IT perspective solves everything, in essence, it would seem. Okay, so we're going to kick off. My name is Derek Bruce. I work for a company called Derek Bruce Associates. And that basically provides a portfolio of support around leadership and learning development, consultancy around people needs, and event management and event hosting. And in the context of today, I'm going to be talking about employee-generated learning. And that's something which I've had a lot of experience in a corporate role doing over the last couple of years, but previously in different roles as well. I'm going to position a couple of things. As you might have noticed, I'm a native English speaker. So for those who aren't native English speakers, if I begin to speak a bit too quickly, if I get into my Londonisms and start saying random words, just put something in the chat and I'll slow down or repeat stuff as well. I want to make sure everybody feels involved and more importantly, can understand what I'm saying. To reassure you as well, we're going to have around 40 minutes or so just going through the experiences I've had, and these aren't marketing things, these aren't things around it's awesome, these are real world examples. But I also want to make sure that as people have devoted time in your afternoon, and I think in morning in some cases, to attending, if you do have burning questions, if you're not quite sure, if you want to just put stuff in the chat, we can go through that. This session is flexible. I have, I think, 8 more slides. So it's not a huge amount, but if you do have questions or things you're thinking before we get started, stick them in the chat. And if they're not covered in the content we're going to go through, then we'll make sure to talk about those things as well. So just to give you that kind of reassurance. In terms of how we're going to do today's journey, it's very much talking around, first of all, how the experience I've had really helped unlock untapped potential in terms of what are the key benefits you would get in an organization by actually focusing on and bringing in employee-generated learning. And it's something where I saw a phrase a few weeks ago by a report, I think it was Josh Bershkin or whoever it was, and he said it's kind of like moving away from e-learning to we-learning. And I love that kind of link from, it's not just, oh, we're going to do stuff, click, click, click. It's actually, how do we encourage and engage our people to really learn and share what they're learning in the organization as well. So we're going to talk a bit about the benefits which I experienced, also why it was so important for me and my L&D team. We're also going to talk about some of the things which I experienced which were planned, which were kind of cool, but some stuff for us thinking, didn't see this coming. This is something, when it comes to employee-generated learners, like, okay, good to see that because it's something which I'd never anticipated. And these are actually things which are really cool, but also things which were like a bit of a challenge. But some of the other bits we're going to talk about are just some things which, if you move towards doing this in your organization or in your team or in your company, some things which I think are really, really important for you to do. And again, the good thing is it's not a rocket science. But one of the things about employee-generated learning is we've probably all been doing it. If you work in HR or in learning or in sales or in marketing, we've probably been doing it anyway in some form, in some guise. This just really helps kind of cement it into a much more kind of consistent way of doing it as well. So we're going to talk about that today. And again, if you do have questions, observations, just please use the chat and actually let us know what you think as well. So going back to the start of why this is something which is really important to me, when I was in my role working for a large organization which did bioscience, made some amazing products across the world and an amazing L&D team, we had a learning ethos, which is very much around people learning together and growing together. And that concept is very much around people owning learning, people having fun, people sharing learning, and people also want to find out new stuff. And we realized it's great if you work in L&D or leadership or stuff to give people content. But we also realized that if we allow people to kind of share what they know within an organization, that does increase learning engagement because it actually increases participation of people in the company. It's almost like if you have those, and I'm showing my age a bit here now, but if you have those coffee shop kind of conversations or those water cooler conversations, people are sharing stuff, they're talking about what's going on. And having the whole ability to have employee-generated learning really reinforces that because it brings together the fact that John in accounts or Susan in finance or Karen in marketing is sharing something which the organization can actually really bring together and actually share as well. One of the things also, which is what I was looking into, is because all the learning I was managing and doing in an organization was being created externally. And I thought, okay, we have some amazing talent in this company. We have some amazing knowledge. We have some amazing people. And we're not kind of giving them a space to have to share their voices. And by doing that, we realized that we could balance or actually reduce the investment with external learning in terms of production, in terms of the online needs to actually cross-fertilize that with having internal learning, which is kind of stuff which people need to know, and reinvest budget and resources in different places as well. And the thing I think, which is also why it's so cool now, is because everybody's been through I hate to say the word, the pandemic. And one of the things the pandemic did is it gave people, whether we wanted it or not, this great big shot on the arm of how to use technology. Everybody now from pre-2020, where Zoom and Teams and stuff, which is things you use occasionally, everybody uses that stuff every single day. And with the advent of, and we were using Ease Generator, with the advent of that increased knowledge around skills, it meant people were a bit more comfortable using technology. And so what I found was having a really great partner, having a really great system, and again, Ease Generator is one of those. It meant people could also utilize those skills they'd learned over the last, 4 years now since the pandemic, might be 3 depending where you are. And alongside that, actually bringing a really nice link to our overall learning ecosystem. So a learning management system, LXP, Microsoft Teams as communities, and then you have this particular thing which allows people to create awesome learning in a really simple way as well. I just see that someone's mentioned that can we share the slides? I think the slides are going to be shared afterwards as well. So there's no kind of embargo in terms of slides as well. So that's kind of why I thought it was so cool and also why I started using it. And alongside that, it was very much around, as I mentioned before, giving people the space to learn, to share learning, but more importantly, also giving people the space to move away from those little silos. So again, a company I worked in had around 20,000 people globally, different functions, different regions, different business units. And every business unit, because I worked in a global role, thought they were different, even though they were doing very, very, very similar things. And one of the nice things about employee-generated learning is it actually helps to break down silos. It helps to bring a community to an organization because you can actually work on the learning and you can share the content across function, across departments, across teams. And so we found one of the things where it's also a really cool thing to do is that people who are building and designing learning content actually by default start collaborating more, by default start working together more, and by default start breaking down those silos because they're working on how do we make sure somebody can do this skill and they're talking different functions as well. So again, that's one of the key things which I thought, wow, this is a really cool thing to do. And the last thing was very much around how do we also kind of recognize the talent and the skills we have, because alongside giving people the space to create learning, alongside giving people the space to actually show what they know and help all their colleagues do some really cool stuff, if you have a really good employee-generated learning platform in place, or even a process in place, you can also recognize people. And I'm going to touch a bit more about how we did some of that work within a company I worked at later on. But I think one of the key things which makes employee-generated learning work is that you can recognize who's done stuff. And I think also there's some very, very good research which implies and indicates that colleagues prefer to look at content which their colleagues have made. If they've got a choice between something which has happened from outside or something which has been done internally, people much, much, much prefer to see stuff which somebody they know has done in a company, because they know the company, they know the culture, and it kind of just brings in that ability to also then subsequently recognize people for doing some really, really cool things as well. So that was the reason why we as an organization and me as a team really, really wanted to focus on employee-generated learning and bring it in. So having a great partner, as in EG we had, but also just bringing some engagement to it, and also bringing just the ability to recognize and support people as they go through the process as well. So that was kind of the first bit in terms of why it's such a cool thing, and why we as an organization really looked into doing it as well. Some of the things which the journey really, really, really reinforced, though, was if you're going to introduce employee-generated learning into any organization, however you do it has to fit within the culture of your organization. So I mentioned a company I was working with had a great learning vision. It had the focus around owning learning, making learning fun, sharing learning, making it new. And the team I worked in wasn't a team which pushed out learning content. It wasn't a team which gave people stuff to do. It was a team which gave you autonomy for people to kind of drive their learning and to drive how they actually learn as well. And so for us, the alignment of our culture is very much around, we're going to make sure we involve everybody in this change, in what we're going to be doing. And we did a pilot, and it was a really simple pilot that, sorry, someone's got EGL, employee-generated learning, EGL. Sorry, we do abbreviations. We love those three-letter things in L&D. So employee-generated learning is EGL. Thank you, Darwin, for that. Darren, sorry, can't read because I've got my glasses on. But basically, it's very much around, we did a pilot which allowed people from different parts of the organization just to mess around and play with and produce learning and get used to it. That pilot was then reviewed, and we introduced the platform and a tool to actually do it across the organization. The pilot also involved people outside of HR, people outside of L&D, and people who had never used this kind of platform before. We wanted to make sure as a demographic we were representing everybody's views. The pilot also then allowed us to see what kind of governance we needed to do. Did we need to make it really, really robust and really strict? Or did we need to just go, do you know what, we're going to give everybody access to this particular platform and everybody can start using the tool? And for our organization, what worked really well was having a really light touch around governance, but having a really, really strong touch around, before you get started, here's what you need to know. So when it comes down to culture, you might find in your organization it needs to be a bit more robust. You might find you can just literally say, we're going to have a great platform to support it, we bring it in. Or you might find in your culture, what you need to do is have a lot of processes and steps. But whatever culture you have, think about, what is it you want to do around employee-generated learning? Is it giving them the ability to subject matter experts? Is it giving the ability to the learning development team? Is it a bit in between that? Is it around knowledge? Is it around learning? Because again, it's different nuances. But again, align what you want to do with your culture. And I think for us, it worked brilliantly because we managed to do that. The other thing which is really, really, really important is around getting stakeholder buy-in. And I'm not talking about people in HR or learning, because they generally love whatever you do if it's brand new and shiny. That's kind of L&D people, it would seem. But it's much more around people outside of HR, people alongside HR business partners, but people like IT, people like marketing, people like comms, because they can help you actually get the advocacy, but also the message across as well. Because if I'm honest, the one thing which I spent most time with my team wasn't the tech, it wasn't how to use it was pretty much around communication and enabling people to understand why this is such a good thing to do, how easy it is to do, and how you get started, and then reinforce that on a regular basis as well. So again, that's kind of, for me, having a stakeholder buy-in in terms of getting the right people in the room to know what you're trying to do as a company, and then getting those people involved in the actual process as well. And ultimately, having a foundation of the right technology. So the organisation I worked in, as I said before, liked things to be simple, liked things to be easy. It was a tech company. So literally we worked with the Easy Generator, and one of the things which again that platform gave us is the fact that it is pretty easy to use. If you can use PowerPoint, Word, Excel, and a smartphone, you can basically use this platform. And that's how we sold it. But the other thing we sold it as in was, it's in the flow of your work. It's not a brand new thing which has to be done separately. It's just another application you use day to day. And for us, by making it kind of almost like business as usual, just something else which help you do stuff, it made it much easier to transition to actually use it rather than saying we have this thing that's very separate. And I had a conversation recently, and I know I was talking to a colleague, and we were talking around how did we get past the whole issue around security and privacy and all that kind of stuff. And, what about people who might be creating stuff which isn't right or dodgy stuff? And we kind of realized about if you already have policies around privacy, around IT, they align to that as well. If you already do checks around security, the team at EG can help make sure that the system actually aligns to that as well. And we realized that actually it's just another application. It's just another way of giving people the ability to learn and to use great learning using a very simple tool. So for us, I mean, having technology which was simple and easy to use was important, but also something which was simple and fit into people's flow of work as well. And I think just looking at a quick question, I'm going to pause now. So Darren's talking around there's a ton of PowerPoint decks that would need to be adapted. You're concerned with stakeholders thinking to just convert existing content slides instead of rethinking, redesigning. That's a really good point. And I think one of the things I'll touch on here, the way learning and knowledge management was done before we did this was through PowerPoint. And I don't know if it's one of those weird things where you join an organization, all of a sudden PowerPoint is your friend. And it's like, I don't know where this came from. Everybody's got to use PowerPoint. I had an intern join and he was like, why am I using PowerPoint? It was one of these weird conversations. One of the things we realized is with PowerPoint, it doesn't help you learn. It just shows you static information. And there's a bit difference where you can actually move information to an easy generator and make it engaging. You've got the things like the videos, you've got the activities, you've got the checks, you've got these things to make it engaging. And I think, and again, Teresa, if I'm wrong, correct me, but I think you can import stuff into EG, which allows you to then create the content. So the message around it's just a matter of converting A to B, it isn't. It's around using the basis of a PowerPoint to make an engaging learning process. But the actual steps to doing that are fairly simple because you import a document or you import what it is. And then, and if I remember rightly again, it allows you to then make the learning in different kind of styles where you can talk about a PDF, you can talk about questions, you can have some audio, you can have some video. It allows just the engagement to happen as well. So it isn't as simple as we're just going to convert slides into this. It's actually around, is whatever you have in a PowerPoint worth making into learning first and foremost? And if it is, how do you make sure that somebody in the organization, when they go through this, is going to be engaging? What do we need to do in a really simple way? And if the weird thing is actually, if I think about the time, and I've created stuff in EG, if I think about the time it takes me to create a PowerPoint and create an EG experience, it's about the same. But the output is so different in terms of what someone can do with the learning, as I like to call it, compared to someone having a 74 slide PowerPoint with lots of stuff on, and that's kind of it. So again, it is a really, really great way of thinking about not just the employee-generated learning, but also the platform which helps people get engagement as well. I hope that kind of helps your concern. So it's a great point, Darren, as well. Some of the other things which kind of popped up throughout the time when we were actually bringing it in and actually really embedding it in the organization was resourcing. And I talk about resourcing in the sense I mentioned community again, communication previously. It's really important to have somebody who can help support the community of learning grow. So within our organization, we use Microsoft Teams, and anybody who became an author, anybody who was contributing became part of that Microsoft Teams team. You know what I mean? Teams as in team and team as in Microsoft. And that allowed, one, everybody to recognize everybody else. Two, it allowed us to see who are the great kind of people doing stuff. And 3, allowed us to keep supporting that community with support. So development, with tips, with hints, whatever. And that just meant that, again, talking about recognition, the simple act of having that community meant that that community built, and also that community became advocates. But one of the things we had was a really, really great intern who loved the whole social community bit, who managed that. She did constant posting. We used some data from EG to also support in terms of what are the top 10 learnings of the week, what kind of things are people doing, but we're getting lots of leverage as well. And I think one of the things it helped us to do, which one of those we didn't really appreciate it, was reduce duplication. Because by having a community, by having the top 10 and knowing what people are making, if I was working in a sales team and I realized I wanted to create some really cool onboarding stuff, but I realized that my colleagues in marketing have created a really great onboarding template, rather than reinvent the wheel, I could take that onboarding template and just change the content and then re-upload it. And we found that actually supported us in terms of being much more efficient in terms of how we did our internal learning as well. So that was a really, really cool thing, but it does need somebody to really kind of just nurture the community in its infancy as well. And I think that's like many, many, many things as well. Yep, thanks for that, Teresa. I think in terms of engagement as well, there's also a thing around how do you make sure that once we get it, people don't just go in and create some really, really great stuff and it's one and it's done. And for my old company, one of the things we did is we had a really good campaign which was already in place. This is existing, it's business as usual, where for every single learning hour people did, we planted a certain number of trees. So if people did a certain number of hours, we plant a tree somewhere, which would then link to our sustainability goal, but also it's kind of it's a right thing to do. You know, it's actually to say learning hours equal this, and it encourages people to learn. And we realized, well, if we're doing this anyway, how do we bring this in to support this new community of people who are creating some great content? How do we recognize them? How do we encourage them? So we had this great kind of, and it wasn't a competition, so to speak, it was kind of more a subtle encouragement. It was kind of more around that. And we actually said for every person who you show is generated to, and they then log on and they create a profile and they create some learning. For every person who does that, we're going to plant another tree. And that was it. Really simple. So kind of the idea was that, you know, if I, for example, if I speak to Teresa, she then goes, oh, that's really cool, didn't know about it. She creates this amazing piece of e-learning. We promote it via the communication channels. It goes on the LMS and people start using it. That's one tree planted. And if you think, we started with, I think, 8 or 9 people in our pilot. I think as at this January 2024, there's over 300 people. Is that about right? It's about over 300. And the communication and the marketing came quite late. So a lot of it was also word of mouth. And thinking about, okay, so there's now, I think the organization about 25,000 people. And that number of the 300 is getting bigger and bigger, month on month on. Because people know about it, but also they know there's a benefit to me introducing to other people as well. So if you have existing ways of engaging people, existing ways of promoting what you do, existing ways of influencing people in a very subtle way, then use them as well. And I think that goes back to the third point in terms of something which I found out, which was unexpected, but it's really, really important, which is very much around, as I said before, introduce employee-generated learning as something which is business as usual. It's not a new thing. Working in HR, and I think some of you work in HR or learning or different functions, one of the things we sometimes forget is that an employee is getting lots of stuff from us and other teams. They've got day-to-day stuff. If they're sales, they've got sales stuff to do. If they're marketing, and so forth. And so trying to say, okay, if there's a need for us to create some learning for a colleague, if there's a need for a function to get some content which supports something, this is how you do it. And it's just how we do it. It's not complicated. It's not too sophisticated. It's just really simple and it's easy. And I think that mindset makes things much, much, much easier. But it also allows you to measure things which are simple. There's common questions around, okay, so once you've got it, how do you measure it's been successful? Well, it's kind of, you just make sure people are using it. You know, that's kind of a measure of success. And if you're thinking about you didn't have anything beforehand, then if people are using it, it's a great measure. The other way is, as I said, measuring how people promote it and what they share. but also measuring how much people like and use the content that's being created. And for us, if we're seeing people who, going back to onboarding, join a team, they now have something which really helps them to onboard and feel part of a function. And that process is sped up. That process is much more robust. That's a measure of success for us. It doesn't have to be, I think it's a phrase I heard years ago from a really cool guy in Amsterdam. It's called vanity metrics, which is kind of you measure stuff for the sake of it and then you promote it and no one really cares. So for us, it was very much around making it business as usual that allows you to measure what's important. And what's important is people understanding what they needed to learn and learning it, or having access to content as well. So I think that does a couple of things in terms of when it came down to some things that I hadn't expected to, but actually worked really well. These are 3 of those things as well. Just having a quick look through the chat. Okay, so I think it's Katerina. Yeah, that's the right word to pronounce it. Again, apologies, I'm in London. We have 1-syllable names, so it's always much easier. So how do you measure the quality of content? That is a really, 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 really common question. And what we did was, first of all, as I said, we had templates to support what content people made. So it's literally, you have a beginning, you have a middle, you have an end, you have assessments. This is how you do it. So when it came down to physically doing it, each generator was literally showing you what you need to put in certain places. Prior to getting a logon, though, we did two things which are really, really simple, but it also meant we had a handle on making sure the right people are going to do the right kind of things. The first thing was everybody had to go through an ease generator introduction to ease generator. That's a long sentence, but I think you know what I mean. We created the introduction to the tool on the tool, and I think it was 20 minutes or something like that, really simple. But it kind of just showed what you needed to do. The other thing we did in that 20 minutes, we also said, okay, don't be an arse. These are the things which we expect when you do stuff, and these are the things we expect you to do when you're creating content for your colleagues. And that was it. We weren't heavy-handed. It wasn't like, okay, it was very much around, if you're going to create content on this, this, and this, make sure it's something which your colleagues are going to use. Make sure it's something which isn't rude. Make sure it's not slandering your organization. Make sure it's stuff which is valuable. And that, as part of the learning, pretty much worked. And as at today, touch wood, never had any content which wasn't good. We had content which may not have been as detailed as it needed to be. And the thing which I suppose answered your question in a weird way was if the content which was again driven to certain demographics wasn't used or wasn't shared or wasn't liked, that was a measure for us. It's very much a case of this content needs to be sharper, more engaged and whatever, but we gave support to people then if we saw those trends happening to make sure the content was really good. When it comes down to vetting, the way the physical IT bit worked, and again, I'm not a very techie, so this is kind of me trying to explain it from my eyes, was that you'd have the e-generator package kind of made up of all e-learning relearning, sorry. You'd then move it from the platform onto our learning management system through our IT team. And they would just sense check every now and again what was going on, if it made sense. Did it have beginning, middle, and end? And that was kind of more like a 4-eye principle as well. But in terms of vetting, I think if you're vetting stuff, it's too late. You want to make sure the people who use it have the ability and understanding what you need to do before they start doing it. And I think at the front end, we did a lot of work around supporting what people did. They had to go through the actual learning before they could get access as well. And then the random vetting happened at the end. And so I say, in terms of quality of content, if you do the stuff at the front end, that really helps at the back end as well. I think Sonia's heading off. Enjoy your next meeting. It's not going to be as good as this one, so there it is. I think also, if you're going for any courses, how do you make them easy accessible to find for staff who might need some learning? So I think that's, I want to say, theme. I don't know how to pronounce the name, apologies, but in terms of how you kind of make, if you've got lots of stuff, what the process we used was very much using LMS, which then allocated learning to people, to communities. So that was one of the ways of doing it. So if we did, for example, the sales onboarding program or learning, whatever, that would then be allocated to people who were in the first year in a sales team and so forth. And I would actually get that then pushed to them. So you can actually push content to people. But that, I think, was all done through our learning management system. So I think, again, it's very much more around, if you've got an LXP or an LMS, how that pushes stuff already. So this isn't doing anything different. It's just, if you've got a process already, it just falls into it. So if you have an LXP which can delegate stuff, and that's the way you would do it as well. Just looking at questions might be fine. Is AI integrated to help people make content engaging, attractive, and relevant? I think Teresa, that's a yes. Yes, she's nodding.
Indeed. Yeah, we also offer AI in Easy Generator.
And it's a lovely AI as well. It's not one of these evil one wants to take the world. This is one of a nice version of AI as well. Recap. Katerina, so does Teresa come here? Cool. Okay, cool. Okay. So that's pretty much things that it taught us. I think a few more things to highlight just in terms of what's really important. I've got down community building here again, because again, I think the benefit we had and the success we had was because the community of people using EG and then promoting it was so strong. But again, that's because we had a dedicated resource helping to manage the community. We had a dedicated resource who was engaged in the community, and people were developed before they started it. And to reassure you, it wasn't just subject matter experts or L&D people. This was open to employees across the whole organization, because we wanted to use it as much for learning as also for knowledge management as well. So again, having that community of people, having the ability to share what they're doing, but also be recognized is really important. The other thing, again, really, really important, which again for us worked really well, was working with a vendor or a partner, I should say, not vendor, partner, that's a horrible word, who was one, agile, but two, provided support. And I think one of the things, and I'm sort of amazed at it now, is alongside you're going to use the tool as an employee and get access to some training and so forth. We had bi-monthly, I think that's every other week. Yeah, bi-monthly, that's the right phrase. Support, where we had bi-monthly webinars with EG where people could drop in to actually do stuff or attend an onboarding. And that just meant people had the ability to see the latest trends in how you use AI to create learning, or how you make an engaging start to a session, or how you do great evaluations, but also great onboarding. And I think having that flexibility and having somebody who every other week you could go and find stuff, because a partner was running these sessions, it took the work away from me, but it also meant that the community knew they were supported as well. And I think the other thing I mentioned beforehand is the guidelines around governance. You know, for us, it was who wants to use it, fine, need to go through this particular just development to make sure you can do the right kind of stuff. Don't be an ask principle, we used that as well, and then off you go. And it was light. Other companies might want to do it where you've got to go through certain ticks and checks. For us, that worked. But again, be aware, the more ticks and checks you've got to do, the more challenges you're making for somebody to start creating content. And you need to balance that as well in terms of just making sure. So again, we have flexible guidelines around that. The last thing before I give you guys some space, give you people, my D&I training is going out the window, give space for questions, is very much around, if you only walk away with 3 things from today, is when you start talking about employer-generated learning and bringing in a system to support you, make sure you talk to people who are not in L&D and not in HR. IT for us made a huge difference, because it meant we knew that this would work seamlessly, all the checks were done, it was simple to do. And also we reassured them, again, and it was great because the partner we had at EG allowed the back-end IT people in our team to spend some time with the back-end people in EG, just to make sure I understood what was going on. They didn't need to do anything, but they had that ability to understand when you're moving, I think it was a SCORM package, the techie word, from A to B, what happens, what can be changed, what needs to be done, that kind of stuff. So having the right stakeholders involved early on made a huge difference. And just adding to that point around the stakeholders is also, when you're talking around the content, it's also around making sure people like business partners and so forth are also able to communicate to their management teams and so forth as well. The second key thing is when you're talking about implementation and bringing it into an organization, it's very much around, for us, the pilot worked really well. The pilot was kind of the bit where we started the message, started the journey, got the right people, and created those advocates who started to kind of also talk about it. And a lovely thing was, once we got to a point, I think it would have been towards the end of last year, when people found out about that, we were promoting and project learning, and we had this great system, they just started using it. It wasn't it was like, oh my God, it's really good. Where's it been? It's awesome. So I think, again, the co-creation with having people in your organization involved in it and not making it an L&D or HR thing, but making it a company thing was really good. And I've mentioned before, and again, it is one of those things where we in L&D or HR always feel we need to have control. Yeah. We always need to be the ones who manage and do, and sometimes we don't need it. And I think in a context of project learning, the guidelines need to be appropriate, but they don't need to be heavy. And I think if we get to a point where you have so much content, you're right what's going on, that's a great place to be. Because if people are making stuff, then at least people are using, you've got an engaged community of employees making great content as well. So I think that they're the things which I think if you only walk away with 3 things today, those 3 things are kind of pretty cool. So that's kind of me. I'm going to stop rambling. I'm going to stop talking. I hope it made sense. We've got time for questions now. Over to you. Do you have more questions in the chat, Therese? I'm going to just have some water while you...
Yeah, indeed. Like the messages are popping up as we speak. One question was referring to our key takeaways from the slide before. And that is referring to IT. So when you are speaking about IT, what do you mean by IT?
Oh, sorry, yeah, apologies. Yeah, so I work in HR. IT always separate in white coat glasses. So by IT, I mean the people who manage whatever IT infrastructure you have in your organization. So I worked with HRIS, which is my function, where basically the guys who manage all the HR systems, but also worked with the people who managed the acquisition of new applications and platforms around data, around security, around locations, that kind of stuff. So it's all just making sure that all those I's and T's are dotted and crossed as well. So that's IT is kind of the people who run your IT ecosystem in essence.
Amazing. Yeah. And also here I see a comment, 3 cheers to IT as an innovation enabler.
100%,
So.
they're awesome.
Great. And then one more question that was very interesting with regards to knowledge management. So how is employee-generated learning an enabler for knowledge management in your point of view?
Yeah, so some of the we found was, so there are certain things which, okay, going back, the organization I worked in had a demographic which, like most kind of tech kind of companies, were mid to late 40s, were the people who knew everything. And one of the things we're concerned of is you've got people coming into the organization with a different demographic, but these people at that age range, there's stuff we want to make sure we retain. So there's learning, which is things which you don't know content or you want to find out something new. But we used it also as a repository where subject matter experts could also put content and actually just kind of create records or libraries of what they did and how they did stuff. And again, we stored it on a learning management system. And then we created it into, getting very technical now how we did stuff, but we had learning journeys. And learning journey would then have learning, which would then be, yeah, you'd go through, yes, no answer questions, that kind of stuff, all awesome. But also a repository of where if you need to know how to do this, and it's a very black and white, this is how you do this is what this is, it's very much like that as well. So the knowledge management piece was where we decided that static information for certain demographics could also utilize the tool, because it then allowed, one, the person who knew it to basically create the content, and two, allowed the person who knew it to edit and update the content much easier than a PowerPoint, because PowerPoint was our go-to thing. But if something changed, you then change in, or not even, people don't remember to change PowerPoints. So knowledge management was used in the context of creating static content, putting it on the LMS, put it into learning portfolios, allow people to have access to it in a really simple way. And also that was searchable. And that's the key thing. People could still search for it and find it really easily. So that's why we used it for both avenues as well.
Amazing. Yeah. Knowledge retention is really important, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%.
And then there is another question regarding the content creation. What kind of incentives have been used in your journey of implementing employee-generated learning? I know we talked about the sustainability piece, so planting trees. Was there anything else, how you motivated and recognized content creators?
Yeah, so one of the things we did is we also, alongside of the sessions which EG did on a bi-monthly basis, we also created sessions where they had access to how to do certain things. They had access also to learning knowledge and learning content to enable them to be better skilled as people as well. So the recognition was as much around, if you do this, sustainability really awesome, which is external, but also because you're contributing to the organization, we want to give you something back. So we're going to create sessions which support you as a learner. And for example, we said, one of the things we did was we're going to do quarterly events which give you something you need. Let us know what topics we can cover for you. And we did quarterly sessions on topics for that community specifically. Weirdly, they wanted to know around performance management, which was kind of odd, but they wanted to know about it, so we did it. But it was also giving them the space to say, okay, we're not going to impose what we think you need. We're going to say, we're going to recognize you. What's the best way to do it? And they said, yeah, we want to know more around how to do this, more about this, more about this. And we then kind of rewarded them with reciprocal skills and knowledge being given back to them as well. Plus, the other thing we did was, we did the top 10. We also recognized the learning which was the most used as well. So again, people could see like, oh, I've done this and this is what's being used, and everybody can see that as well. So it's also it's kind of just highlighting their voices, highlighting their work as well. But great question, Katerina.
Indeed. And another question in the chat, which is, or which we come across quite often, which is related to governance. So how do you actually establish a governance? Which communication channels and tools do you use to communicate? For example, what types of e-learnings can be created in Easy Generator?
Yeah.
Is it something that you use Easy Generator for, or anything around the tool?
Yeah, so we use both. So we use Easy Generator in terms of the tool itself. When people went through the pre-session, all the stuff was in there in terms of what's good, what's not so good, what to do. Alongside that, there were Microsoft Teams calls to that community, giving them kind of launch events as well. So they understood what the whole purpose of it was. And those launch events, those launch calls, were not just given to content creators, but also to other parts of the business as well. So the governance in terms of making people aware of it was partly one of the ways. Using the actual learning people had to do before they started was another way as well. And again, we had the check in terms of governance, in terms of content with the HR IT teams as well. But in terms of giving access, our model was access can go to anybody but you need to do these things first. Other companies have limited access to the L&D team, for example, or limited to subject matter experts, which is a different approach as well. So I think the governance kind of works best for what works best for you. But in terms of consistency, again, the work we did was, this is what you can use it for. This is what you can do. This is, don't be an arse. This is that kind of stuff as well. And also, once you've got stuff and it's being moved onto our LMS, we will see what's happening anyway. And we've got that kind of four-eyes principle. But we as L&D, I was managing the actual the product, kind of the culture we had was an autonomous culture, so it worked. But I think that's again where it does depend on what works best in your culture as well. That's a great question.
Indeed. Yeah, and also scrolling through the chat, I think we have answered the most important questions that were asked multiple times. So I'm also aware that we are at the end of the session. Maybe one last question I see from Christine before we end the webinar. How does translation work? How can you ensure that, multiple languages are covered by an e-learning? Do you have there any tips to share, Derek?
I think that for one thing is, I think from memory game, the platform itself can do translations.
Correct, yeah.
But I think the thing which worked for us is because it's being created by people in the organization, and it's being created also globally and regionally. If the content is being created for our colleagues who are only going to be based in France, for example, they could create the content in French, and that's it. And I think that's kind of the thing where when we looked at external relationships we had with vendors, we had to pay for translations. Whereas because the person is native and is doing stuff, they can actually then do it in mother tongue, so to speak, as well. But alongside that, if it wasn't being used in one language, we did have the ability just to translate it in the tool as well. And I think that ability to English is going to now be French, and we had French, German, Dutch, Chinese, Polish, and other languages. We could do that within the tool as well. Or the person created it could do it on the tool as well. And I think that flexibility for an international company is awesome as well. Because if you compare doing that to paying for translations for English to those languages, even that cost alone is a cost you don't actually need to be spending if you've got a great tool as well. Anything you want to add to that from your side, Teresa?
Yeah, you covered it very well. And also from my side, what I hear typically from companies that the automated translation functionality that Easy Generator offers is really a time saver and resource saver, as you mentioned, to quickly make the e-learnings then also available in multiple languages.
Yeah. And I think there's one thing I haven't mentioned, but one thing which was a game changer for us. I'm sorry about the time. I'm conscious I've been 3 minutes over. But the speed of delivery to the audience, that was increased dramatically. And what I mean by that is if we were using partners to do stuff, and the partners were amazing, but it meant to create WeLearning, as we call it now, we had to go to a partner, get them to do stuff, wait for turnaround time, get it back, upload it, test it, upload it, done. That period of time wasn't 24 hours, wasn't 48 hours. With the employee-generated learning and using EG, we were able to bring that down to at most 48 hours, but normally 24 hours, because our HRIT teams, who are awesome, by the way, are able to basically upload the score once they got it onto the platform the next day, which also then meant getting content to our people. There's a phrase I used in my old company, which was, I think it's farm to fork, which is kind of a agricultural kind of phrase. The similar principle was much reduced for us because people could then do stuff, update it, edit it, still get it to people really quickly as well. I think I forgot to mention.
Amazing. Derek, thank you so much
Pleasure.
for making the time today and sharing your insights on employee-generated learning. If there are any further questions, please feel free to contact us. I will drop the contact form in the chat. And Derek, thank you again for the amazing insights that you shared today.
Cool. Thank you all for attending. Much appreciated.